The engine hummed low like a secret too heavy to keep, and in that split second when Juliet's fingers brushed mine on the gearshift, the world outside the dusty windshield of my old Ford dissolved into nothing. "Don't let go," she whispered, her voice cracking like dry earth under summer rain. And I knew right then that teaching her to drive was the worst mistake I'd ever made, or the only honest thing I'd done in years. Time didn't just stand still. It shattered, scattering shards of what could never be across the endless stretch of Oregon backroads. Kennedy Harlan had always measured her days in the reliable ticks of routine, the kind that kept the ghosts at bay in Willow Creek, that speck of a town tucked into the Cascade foothills where the evergreens whispered judgments to anyone who dared listen. At 42, she was the fixture everyone nodded to at the feed store or the county fair. The widow who wasn't quite a widow, since Elias had up and left her for the bottle and a waitress in Bend 12 years back, never to return. She ran a small bookkeeping service from the clapboard house on Elm Street, tallying ledgers for loggers and ranchers who paid in cash and small talk, her hands steady on the calculator keys even as her heart stuttered over the empty spaces in her life. Willow Creek wasn't the kind of place that forgave deviations. It was a patchwork of faded glory, where the old mill families clung to timber fortunes long eroded by regulations and recessions, and the newcomers, tech refugees from Portland, eyed the locals like exhibits in a diorama. Church on Sundays was mandatory theater, the pastor's sermons on family and fidelity landing like soft punches to the gut. Kennedy played her part. Baked pies for potlucks, volunteered at the library, kept her truck's tank full for those rare drives up the Mackenzie River when the walls closed in too tight. But in the quiet hours, when the fog rolled in from the valley like a shroud, she wondered if she'd traded her soul for solitude. It started innocently enough, as these things do in towns where fences are as much about minds as property lines. The Hargroves lived next door, their sprawling Victorian sagging under ivy like the weight of unspoken regrets. Harlan Hargrove was a third-generation mill owner, his face a map of creases from years barking orders at crews who felled trees older than the Republic. His wife, Beatrice, was the epitome of Willow Creek propriety. Pearl earrings, bridge club president, and a smile that never reached her eyes. Their daughter, Juliet, was 18 that spring, a late bloom in a family of early expectations, bound for community college in Eugene, majoring in something practical like nursing, because dreams were for city folk. Juliet Hargrove didn't fit the mold, and Kennedy had noticed it from the first awkward wave over the laurel hedge 2 summers prior. She was all sharp angles and quiet storms, with hair the color of wet chestnut bark that she twisted into knots when thinking too hard. While her classmates chased football games and keggers at the reservoir, Juliet haunted the edges, sketching in the library's back stacks, volunteering at the animal shelter where strays eyed her with the same wary hope she carried. Kennedy caught glimpses, Juliet feeding scraps to the barn cats at dawn, or staring out at the rain-lashed hills as if they held answers her textbooks couldn't provide. The request came on a Tuesday in late May, the air thick with the promise of heat that would turn the creek beds to dust by July. Kennedy was weeding the rosebeds out front, her knees sunk into the loamy soil, when Beatrice appeared at the gate, clutching a casserole dish like a shield. "Kennedy, dear," she said, her voice pitched to that neighborly lilt that masked urgency. "Harlan's swamped with the new contracts and Juliet's test is next week. She needs practice hours, real ones, not that simulator nonsense at the DMV. Would you mind? You're so steady behind the wheel." Kennedy paused, dirt caking her nails, and glanced toward the Hargrove porch where Juliet lounged against the railing, pretending to scroll her phone but watching with eyes like shadowed pools. There was something in that gaze, a plea wrapped in defiance, that tugged at the frayed edges of Kennedy's resolve. Driving lessons. Simple. Harmless. A favor for neighbors who'd shared storm shutters and snowblower loans. "Sure," Kennedy said, wiping her hands on her jeans. "We can start tomorrow after school." That first lesson unfolded under a sky bruised with clouds, the Ford's cab smelling of pine air freshener, and the faint leather polish Kennedy applied religiously. Juliet slid into the passenger seat, her backpack thudding to the floor, legs clad in faded Levi's that whispered against the vinyl as she shifted. "Thanks for this," she murmured, buckling in with fingers that trembled just enough to betray her. Kennedy nodded, firing the engine to life, and they pulled out onto Elm, the town unspooling behind them like a worn reel of film. The backroads to the old logging trails were Kennedy's sanctuary, winding ribbons of asphalt flanked by ferns and firs, where the radio crackled with static instead of sermons. She talked her through the basics. Hands at 10 and 2, smooth throttle, eyes on the horizon, not the hood. Juliet gripped the wheel like it was a lifeline, her foot hesitant on the pedal, the truck lurching forward in fits that mirrored the stutter in Kennedy's chest. "Breathe," Kennedy said softly, her voice an anchor in the rattle of gravel. "It's not about control. It's about trust." By the 3rd-mile marker, Juliet had found a rhythm, the truck gliding smoother, her shoulders easing from their knot. They stopped at a pullout overlooking the valley, where the Willamette River snaked silver through meadows gone gold with dandelions. Juliet killed the engine and silence bloomed, thick as the mist rising from the water below. "I hate this place sometimes," she said abruptly, staring out the window. "Everyone knows your business before you do. Like, Dad wants me to join the sorority at Lane, but all I want is to paint. Or write. Something real." Kennedy leaned back, the seat creaking under her, and felt the words lodge in her throat like unshed rain. "Real. What a dangerous word in Willow Creek." "Your folks mean well," she offered, though the lie tasted bitter. They built this life here. Hard to see past the fences." Juliet turned then, her gaze locking on Kennedy's with an intensity that made the air hum. "What about you? You've been here forever. Don't you ever want to just drive away?" The question hung, a spark in dry tinder, and Kennedy's pulse quickened. She thought of Elias's taillights vanishing into the night, of the letters she'd burned instead of sending, of the women in Portland bars whose touches she'd chased like mirages. "Every day," she admitted, the confession slipping free like a stone from a sling. "But leaving's easier said than done." They drove back in companionable quiet, the sun dipping low, painting the dashboard in amber. At the Hargrove driveway, Juliet unbuckled slowly, her hand lingering on the door latch. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked, and Kennedy nodded, watching her unfold from the cab like a secret unfolding. That night, Kennedy lay awake in the dark, the ceiling fan stirring shadows that danced like accusations. Juliet's laugh from the lesson echoed. A bright, unguarded sound that had bubbled up when they'd swerved around a pothole, tires singing on the curve. It had been years since Kennedy had heard joy like that up close, unfiltered by pretense. She rolled over, burying her face in the pillow that still smelled faintly of Elias's aftershave, and wondered if the girl next door was poison or antidote. The lessons continued twice a week, threading through the fabric of Kennedy's days like a hidden seam. They explored the county's veins. The hairpin turns up to Spencer Butte, the straightaways along the Calapooia where pheasants burst from the underbrush like startled thoughts. Juliet improved swiftly, her confidence blooming in the way she handled the curves, anticipating the road's moods. But it was the spaces between instructions that Kennedy began to dread and crave. The girl asked questions that peeled back layers. About the wildflowers that carpeted the meadows in April, the best spots for stargazing away from porch lights, the ache of loving someone who couldn't love you back the same. One afternoon, as they idled by the reservoir, engine off and windows cracked to the lap of water on shore, Juliet pulled a sketchbook from her bag. "Look," she said, flipping to a page where pencil strokes captured the Ford in motion, blurred lines suggesting speed and freedom. Kennedy traced the edge with her fingertip, the paper warm from the sun. "That's us," Juliet explained, her voice soft, "chasing something we can't name yet." Kennedy's throat tightened, the image blurring as emotion welled. A pronoun so simple, yet loaded in Willow Creek's lexicon of isolation. She wanted to warn her, to speak of the town's invisible nooses, the way whispers could strangle dreams, but the words dissolved on her tongue. Instead she murmured, "It's beautiful. Like you see the world clearer than most." Juliet's cheeks flushed, not from the heat, and she closed the book too quickly. They drove home with the radio tuned to a faint country station, Merle Haggard crooning about mamas and trains, the lyrics a veil over the tension coiling in the cab. By the 6th lesson, the air between them had thickened, charged like the moments before a thunderstorm breaks. They were on the old mill road, Juliet at the wheel, when a deer bolted from the tree-line, eyes wide with panic. She braked hard, the truck skidding to a halt inches from the animal, which froze, staring back before vanishing into the green. Adrenaline surged, hearts pounding in unison, and in the hush that followed, Juliet reached across the console, not for the gearshift but for Kennedy's hand. Fingers intertwined, warm and tentative, the touch a current that arced through Kennedy's veins, igniting embers long banked to ash. Time fractured there on that forgotten stretch of asphalt, the world narrowing to the pulse beneath skin, the soft hitch of breath. "Juliet," Kennedy whispered, half plea, half prayer, but the girl only squeezed tighter, her eyes meeting Kennedy's with a vulnerability that stripped them both bare. In that endless moment, Kennedy saw it all. The girl she'd been at 18, wild with questions and quiet with shame. The woman she'd become, armored in resignation. The fragile bridge they were building, one that Willow Creek would burn before letting stand. She should have pulled away. Should have started the engine and driven them back to fences and facades. But she didn't. She held on, letting the stillness swallow them whole, knowing full well that some lines, once crossed, left no road back. The days blurred after that touch, each one a delicate negotiation between restraint and reckless want. Kennedy threw herself into work, poring over spreadsheets until her eyes burned, volunteering extra shifts at the shelter where the dog's eager whines drowned out the echo of Juliet's voice in her head. But Willow Creek was a small stage and the play was relentless. Beatrice waving from her kitchen window with offers of iced tea, Harlan grunting approvals over the hedge about Juliet's progress. "Girl's got your steadiness now," he'd say, clapping Kennedy on the shoulder with a hand rough as bark, oblivious to the tremor it sent through her. Juliet, for her part, navigated the dance with a grace born of necessity. At school, she was the dutiful daughter, acing finals and charming teachers with essays on local history that glossed over the town's undercurrents of prejudice. But in the truck, with the odometer ticking miles into memory, she shed the mask. They talked of everything and nothing, the way the Cascades turned violet at twilight, the injustice of Beatrice's insistence on debutante dresses for a girl who preferred flannel and boots, the sting of classmates' slurs hurled like stones at anyone who didn't fit the evangelical mold. One evening, as they crested the pass toward the old fire watchtower, Juliet confessed over the rumble of the engine. "Mom found my journal last month, the one with the poems about girls." Her voice was steady, but her knuckles whitened on the wheel. She didn't say anything outright, just started leaving pamphlets on the coffee table. "Pray the rainbow away. That sort of garbage. Dad pretends it doesn't exist, like if he doesn't look, it'll vanish." Kennedy's grip tightened on the door handle, anger simmering low like coals under ash. She'd seen the pamphlets herself, slipped under windshields at church or left in library books. Subtle barbs from Pastor Ellis's flock, reminders that Willow Creek's grace extended only to the straight and narrow. "They love you," she said finally, the words a reflex even as they rang hollow. "In their way. But love shouldn't come with conditions." Juliet laughed, a sound brittle as autumn leaves. "Their way feels like a cage. I want out, Kennedy. I want to drive until the rear view's empty." She glanced over, eyes fierce with the fire of youth unscarred by compromise. "Don't you? Haven't you ever loved someone the town wouldn't allow?" The question landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading through Kennedy's core. She thought of Sarah, the summer she was 20, working the berry fields near Salem, tousled hair and calloused hands, stolen kisses behind the packing shed that tasted of salt and secrecy. It had ended in tears and a hasty departure. Sarah bound for Seattle with a scholarship and a promise Kennedy knew was empty. Then Elias, the safe choice, the cover, whose indifference had been a mercy until it wasn't. "More than once," Kennedy admitted, her voice rough. "But wanting and having. That's the cruelest divide." They reached the tower as dusk deepened, the structure a skeletal sentinel against the stars pricking the sky. Juliet parked facing the valley, the engines ticked the only sound as night folded in. She didn't turn off the headlights. Their beams carved a path through the dark, illuminating wild grasses that swayed like confessions. "Show me," Juliet said suddenly, unbuckling her seatbelt, "what it feels like to cross that line." Kennedy's breath caught, the cab shrinking around them. Juliet's hand found hers again. Deliberate this time, thumb tracing the ridge of knuckle with a tenderness that unraveled Kennedy thread by thread. The touch was electric, a vow unspoken, and when Juliet leaned in slow, giving space for retreat, their lips met in a brush soft as fog on skin. It was chaste at first, exploratory, tasting of mint gum and the faint salt of apprehension. Then deeper, Juliet's free hand cupping Kennedy's jaw, pulling her into a current that swept away the years of drought. When they parted, gasping, the world had shifted. Juliet's eyes shone, not with triumph but terror laced with wonder. "Was that wrong?" she whispered, and Kennedy, heart hammering, shook her head. "No, darlin'. That's the truest thing I've felt in ages." They drove back in silence, the kiss a talisman burning between them, but Willow Creek greeted them unchanged. Porch lights flickering on, the distant hum of generators, the illusion of order. Kennedy dropped Juliet at the gate, their goodbye a lingering glance through the window, fingers brushing one last time. That night, sleep evaded Kennedy entirely. She paced the kitchen, brewing tea she didn't drink, replaying the moment until it etched itself into her bones. Juliet Hargrove, 18, vibrant, unbowed, was a flame to her tinder dry life, but flames in dry country started wildfires. The next morning brought the first crack in the facade. At the feed store, old Mrs. Landry cornered Kennedy by the seed bins, her voice a conspiratorial hiss. "Heard Harlan's girl's been spending a lot of time in your truck. Folks talk, you know, especially with her tendencies." The word hung, poisoned, and Kennedy forced a smile, murmuring about driving practice while her stomach churned. Tendencies. As if Juliet's heart was a flaw to be mended, not a facet of her soul. She confronted Juliet that afternoon, not in anger but urgency, pulling the truck into a shaded grove off the county line. "People are noticing," she said, killing the engine. "We have to be careful. For your sake." Juliet's face hardened, the sketchbook slamming shut on her lap. "Careful? That's what got you here, isn't it? Hiding until there's nothing left but echoes." She reached for Kennedy's hand, defiant. "I don't want careful. I want you." The plea twisted like a knife, carving open old wounds. Kennedy pulled away, not gently, and started the truck. "You think this is simple? Your family's my family here. One word from the wrong mouth, and it's all ash." They drove in taut quiet, the miles stretching like accusations, and when they parted, Juliet's eyes were red-rimmed, her steps heavy up the drive. Guilt gnawed at Kennedy through the weekend, a relentless tide. She avoided the Hargrove house, tending her garden with mechanical precision, but Sunday service brought collision. Seated 2 pews back, she watched Juliet's profile, rigid, distant, as Pastor Ellis thundered on Sodom's fall, his gaze lingering too long on the younger congregants. Beatrice clutched her hymnal, knuckles white, and Harlan shifted uncomfortably, his cough a punctuation to the discomfort. Afterward, in the fellowship hall over weak coffee, Beatrice pulled Kennedy aside. "Julie's been off lately. Quiet. You notice anything during those lessons?" Her eyes searched, probing for cracks. Kennedy sipped her cup, the bitterness grounding her. "Just nerves about the test. She's a quick study. Lies layered like varnish, smooth but fragile." Beatrice nodded, unsatisfied, and wandered off to chat with the pastor's wife. Juliet caught Kennedy's eye across the room, a silent storm brewing, and slipped out the side door. Kennedy followed minutes later, finding her by the creek behind the church, skipping stones with furious precision. "They're suffocating me," Juliet spat, a flat rock slicing the water. "Last night Dad said if I don't straighten up, no college. As if who I love is a phase." Kennedy sank onto the bank beside her, the damp earth seeping through her skirt. "It's fear, not hate. They built their world on these rules. Breaking them, it costs." Juliet turned, tears carving tracks down her cheeks. "Then help me pay it." She closed the distance, kissing Kennedy fiercely, desperately, the taste of salt mingling with the creek's mist. Kennedy yielded, just for a breath, before pulling back, the world intruding like a cold wind. "Not here," she whispered. "Not like this." But the seed was planted, roots delving deep. Over the following week, their lessons became stolen interludes. Kisses and pullouts, hands linked under the dash, conversations that veered from road signs to the shape of futures they dared not map. Juliet opened like a book long locked, sharing stories of crushes on camp counselors, The isolation of scrolling Tumblr in the dead of night. The dream of a life in Portland where rainbow flags flew unapologetic. Kennedy listened, sharing fragments of her own buried truths. The bar in Eugene where she danced once free for a night. The regret of silencing her voice to fit the town's chorus. Yet with each touch the risk escalated. Whispers multiplied at the diner, sidelong glances at the post office. Harlan mentioned offhand one evening over borrowed tools. "Julie's glowing lately. Must be your influence." His tone was light, but his eyes held questions. Kennedy lay awake that night, the ceiling a canvas for dread. She was 42, anchored by routines and reputations. Juliet was 18, wings clipped but beating fierce. The chasm between them yawned wider with every stolen moment, a fault line waiting to fracture. And still, she drove to the Hargrove door the next day, engine idling like a heartbeat, unable to turn away from the girl who made time stand still. Summer unfurled in Willow Creek like a fever dream, the heat wave pressing down on the valley until the air shimmered and tempers frayed. The creek ran low, exposing rocks that gleamed like accusations, and the evergreens drooped, needles shedding in silent protest. Kennedy's house became a refuge of drawn shades and iced pitchers, but the lessons with Juliet persisted, a ritual that bordered on addiction. They ventured farther now, to the coastal dunes where the Pacific crashed indifferent, or the high meadows near Mackenzie Bridge where wild iris nodded in the breeze. Each drive was a thread in a tapestry they wove in secret, colors vivid against the gray of their lives. Juliet's DMV test loomed, a milestone that Beatrice marked with frantic preparations. Mock exams at the kitchen table, lectures on responsibility that skirted the edges of her fears. "You're our future, Jules," she'd say, smoothing Juliet's hair with hands that trembled. Harlan, ever the stoic, gifted her a keychain engraved with Hargrove pride. The weight of legacy in every link. Juliet accepted it all with a smile that didn't fool Kennedy, who saw the cracks forming. The way her sketches turned darker, strokes heavier with unspoken rage. In the truck, though freedom reigned. One sweltering afternoon, they parked at Honeyman Lake, the water a sapphire mirror under relentless sun. Juliet stripped to her tank top, wading in up to her knees, beckoning Kennedy with a grin that lit the shallows. "Come on. It's not a sin to cool off." Kennedy hesitated, propriety warring with want, but joined her, the chill shocking the heat from her skin. They splashed like children at first, laughter echoing off the pines, until Juliet pulled her close, water beating on lashes as she kissed her slow and deep, the lake lapping at their waists like applause. Floating there, entwined, Juliet traced patterns on Kennedy's arm, her touch a map of territories unclaimed. "I love you," she said simply, the words dropping like stones into the deep. Kennedy's heart seized, joy and terror entwining. Love. The word she'd banished from her lexicon, too dangerous in Willow Creek's lexicon of loss. "I love you too," she replied, voice breaking, and in that admission, the world tilted, possibilities blooming like fireweed in scorched earth. But paradise has predators. Back in town, the whispers coalesced into something sharper. At the library where Kennedy shelved returns on Thursdays, Mrs. Ellis, pastor's wife, arbiter of moral weather, lingered by the romance section, her gaze lingering. "Such devotion to the neighbors," she remarked, fingers trailing spines. "Though some say familiarity breeds complications." Kennedy stacked books with deliberate calm, murmuring pleasantries, but the barb lodged deep. That evening, Juliet arrived late, eyes shadowed, climbing into the cab without a word. "They know," she said finally, as they merged onto the highway. "Not everything. But Mom cornered me about spending too much time with you. Asked if I was confused." The word dripped venom and Juliet's fists clenched. "I denied it. Told her you're just helping. But she looked at me like I was already lost." Kennedy's hands tightened on the wheel, the road blurring. Confusion. As if Juliet's heart was a puzzle to solve, not a truth to honor. "We'll slow down," she said, hating the defeat in her tone. "Just until the test. Then we figure it out." Juliet whirled, fury flashing. "Slow down? That's running, Kennedy. I'm tired of hiding." She grabbed the sketchbook, tearing a page free, a drawing of them, hands linked against a sunset, and crumpled it. This is real. Why can't they see that? The argument simmered through the drive, words like sparks igniting dry grass. By the time they reached the Hargrove gate, Juliet was silent, tears unshed, and Kennedy drove home with the radio off, the quiet of condemnation. She poured a rare glass of bourbon, sitting on the porch as fireflies pulsed in the yard like errant hopes. Love had found her again, fierce and unbidden, but Willow Creek's shadows lengthened with every beat. The test day dawned clear, the kind of blue that mocked human turmoil. Kennedy waited in the parking lot, truck idling, as Juliet emerged from the exam room, license in hand, a triumphant grin splitting her face. "I did it," she crowed, sliding into the driver's seat for the first time unaccompanied. "Your turn to be passenger." They celebrated with a drive to the coast, windows down, salt wind whipping their hair. At a roadside stand near Florence, they shared fish tacos wrapped in foil, grease spotting the paper as they laughed over near misses from lessons past. "You saved me," Juliet said, licking salt from her thumb. "From more than bad turns." Kennedy's chest ached with the weight of it. Saved. Or damned. That night, under a canopy of stars at Cape Perpetua, they made love for the first time, tentative, reverent, on a blanket spread over dunes softened by marram grass. Juliet's body was a revelation, curves and planes yielding under Kennedy's hands, gasps mingling with the ocean's roar. It was sacred, that union, a defiance of the world's narrow decrees, and in the afterglow, wrapped in each other's arms, Kennedy whispered promises she prayed she could keep. Reality intruded on the return, a flat tire on the Siuslaw River bridge forcing them to call Harlan for a tow. He arrived with Beatrice in tow, their faces masks of concern as the truck was winched onto the flatbed. "You two look like you've been through the wars," Harlan joked, but his eyes scanned Juliet's rumpled clothes, the flush on Kennedy's cheeks. Beatrice said nothing, but her silence was a verdict. The fallout brewed slowly, a storm gathering. Juliet texted late that night. "Mom asked about the coast. I lied. Again." Kennedy replied with hearts, but sleep brought dreams of accusations, of hands pulling them apart. Midweek the confrontation came. Kennedy was at the diner, nursing coffee after a client meeting, when Harlan slid into the booth opposite, his bulk filling the space. "Need to talk," he said, voice low, the clink of his spoon against saucer unnaturally loud. "Beatrice is worried. About Julie. About you." Kennedy's cup froze midway, steam curling like smoke signals. "Worried how?" He leaned in, breath smelling of mint over tobacco. "She thinks you're influencing her. Badly. The pastors mentioned concerns too. Folks see you two out late, close. In a town like this, that stirs talk." The words landed like blows, each one bruising the fragile bubble they'd built. Influence. As if love was contagion, Juliet a vessel too pure to taint. "We're friends," Kennedy said evenly. "I taught her to drive. That's all." Harlan's gaze hardened, paternal protectiveness sharpening to edge. "Friends don't look at each other like that. Julie's got a future, college a good match. I won't let whispers ruin it. Or you." The threat hung implicit, and Kennedy paid her tab, walking out into the heat that pressed like judgment. She drove the back roads alone, gravel spitting under tires, until she pulled over at their pullout, the one by the Deer Crossing. Tears came then, hot and unbidden. For the girl she couldn't protect, the love she couldn't claim. Juliet found her there an hour later, having borrowed her mother's car, headlights cutting the dusk. "Dad talked to you," she stated, climbing in, her face a storm cloud. "He grounded me. No more lessons. No more anything." Kennedy reached for her, but Juliet recoiled. "This is what careful gets us. Lies and locks." The hurt in her eyes was a mirror to Kennedy's own, reflecting back the cost of compromise. They sat in the gathering dark, hands inches apart, the space between them a chasm widening. "I won't lose you," Kennedy vowed, voice fierce. "We'll find a way." But as the stars wheeled overhead, doubt crept in like fog. Willow Creek's grip was iron, forged in generations of fear, and their love, tender, defiant, was a spark in a powder keg. The grounding stretched into weeks, a siege that tested the sinews of their resolve. Juliet chafed under house arrest, Her text a lifeline of clipped frustrations. Mom's watching me like a hawk. Dad changed the router password. Kennedy replied with coded endearments. Drive safe in dreams, but the distance gnawed, turning longing to ache. She threw herself into the shelter, mucking stalls until her back screamed. The animal's uncomplicated needs a balm against human complexities. Yet everywhere eyes followed. At the grocery where cashiers tallied items with lingering glances. At church where hymns felt like indictments. Beatrice escalated subtly, inviting Kennedy for tea and talk. Her parlor a stage of lace doilies and framed family portraits. Julie's struggling, she confided over chamomile, her hands folded like prayer. Hormones, you know. And those city ideas from books. We just want what's best: stability, a family like ours. The subtext was clear. Kennedy, with her solitary life and shadowed past, was the interloper, the temptation to excise. Kennedy nodded through it, sipping scalding liquid that mirrored her inner burn. She's strong. Whatever she chooses, she'll make it right. But leaving, she glimpsed Juliet through the upstairs window, silhouette rigid against lace curtains, and the sight twisted like barbed wire. They stole moments where they could. A brush of hands at the mailbox, a midnight walk to the creek under cover of new moon. One such night, fog thick as regret, Juliet slipped out, meeting Kennedy at the old oak that marked their properties. I can't breathe here, she whispered, pressing a folded note into Kennedy's palm. A poem scrawled in haste. Your touch is the road I crave, endless, unyielding. They kissed in the gloom, urgent and shadowed, bodies aligning like puzzle pieces long separated. But secrecy bred carelessness. The next dawn brought Harlan to Kennedy's door, face thunderous, a crumpled paper in his fist. Juliet's poem found under a floorboard. What the hell is this? He demanded, thrusting it forward. The words blurred before her eyes, intimate as exposed veins. Kennedy's world narrowed to that threshold, pulse roaring. Harlan, listen. No. You listen. His voice cracked, not with rage but raw fear. She's my daughter. 18 and headstrong, chasing ghosts. I trusted you, Kennedy. Like family. And this? This is betrayal. Betrayal. The word echoed Elias's parting shot. The sting of loyalty twisted. It's not what you think, she lied, though it was everything and more. Julie's exploring. Growing up. He crumpled the paper further, eyes red-rimmed. Growing up don't mean this. Not here. Not with you. He turned away, shoulders bowed, leaving Kennedy with the echo of his boots on gravel, the poem a casualty on her stoop. Juliet's punishment deepened. Phone confiscated, car keys hidden, college deferred under guise of family time. She rebelled in whispers, skipping meals, locking her door, until Beatrice called a family meeting, voices carrying through thin walls. Kennedy overheard fragments from her yard. Confusion. Influence. Pray it away. The pastor was summoned, his prayers a litany that seeped into the night like smoke. Desperation forged a plan. Late one August evening, as thunder rumbled distant over the Cascades, Juliet texted from a borrowed library phone. Meet at the bridge. Midnight. Bring keys. Kennedy's heart seized. Escape? Folly, salvation all entwined. She packed a bag in haste. Clothes, cash from the safe, a photo of her mother smiling in sepia tones. The Ford purred to life, headlights off as she navigated backroads, the storm breaking in sheets that blurred the world to mercy. At the covered bridge over the Calapooia, relic of pioneer days, moss-cloaked and creaking, Juliet waited, duffel at her feet, rain plastering her hair. I can't stay, she said, voice steady despite the tremble. They want to send me to conversion camp in Idaho. For my own good. Kennedy pulled her into the cab, the downpour a curtain against pursuit. Portland, she said, decision crystallizing. We start there. Fresh. They drove through the tempest, wipers slashing rhythmically, Juliet's hand on Kennedy's knee a tether. The miles unspooled confessions. Juliet's terror of losing herself to their expectations, Kennedy's guilt over igniting the blaze. Dawn found them at a motel off I-5, the neon sign buzzing vacancy like a promise. In the dim room they collapsed into each other, love making a fierce reclamation, bodies mapping routes to unknown horizons. Portland greeted them with urban clamor. Food carts steaming under awnings, murals splashed across brick like defiant art. Kennedy found temp work at a co-op bookstore. Shelves of Queer lit a quiet vindication. While Juliet enrolled in art classes at Portland Community College, her sketches evolving from shadowed valleys to bold cityscapes. They rented a studio apartment in the Pearl District. Walls thin but theirs. Nights filled with takeout and tangled sheets. For a season it was Eden. They walked the bridges at twilight, Willamette glittering below, hands linked unashamed. Juliet bloomed. Hair cropped short, piercings glinting laughter-free. Kennedy shed years, her smile genuine. The weight of Willow Creek lifting like fog burned by sun. "This is us," Juliet would say, tracing Kennedy's collarbone. "Whole. But roots run deep and exiles carry ghosts." Letters arrived from Beatrice, pleas laced with scripture, then silence broken by Harlan's call. "Come home, Julie. We forgive." Juliet deleted voicemails but doubt seeded. Kennedy saw it in her hesitation at mirrors, the way her brush paused over canvases. The fracture came in October, leaves turning crimson like warnings. Juliet's first gallery show loomed, a student exhibit at Reed College, and Kennedy swelled with pride, framing invitations like talismans. But on the night as they dressed, Juliet in a thrift store blazer, Kennedy in her one good blouse, a knock shattered the idyll. Harlan and Beatrice, faces gaunt from worry, stood on the stoop, rain beating on coats. "We drove all night," Beatrice said, eyes on Juliet, arms outstretched. "Your place is with family." Juliet stiffened, door half closed. "Family? You mean control?" Harlan stepped forward, voice gruff. "We saw the error. The pastor helped us understand. It's a phase. We'll get help. Together." The word phase ignited Juliet's fury. "My love's not a phase. It's me." She glanced at Kennedy, plea and anchor. "Tell them." Kennedy met their gazes, heart pounding. "She's happy here. With me. That's the truth." Beatrice's face crumpled, hand to mouth. This is your doing. Seducing my girl, corrupting." "Love isn't corruption," Kennedy cut in, voice steel. "It's salvation." Harlan's eyes narrowed, betrayal etching deeper. "You were family, Kennedy. Now you're poison." He grabbed Juliet's arm, pulling, and chaos erupted, shouts, shoves, Beatrice's sobs mingling with thunder. Juliet wrenched free, backing toward Kennedy. "I'm staying. Go." The door slammed, locks clicking like finality, but the echo lingered. Juliet collapsed against Kennedy, sobs racking, while outside, the engine roared to life, taillights vanishing into the wet night. In the aftermath, Juliet withdrew, sketches abandoned, classes skipped. "They hate me," she whispered one dawn, curled fetal. "Because of us." Kennedy held her, but fracture lines spidered. Guilt whispered, "Your fault. Too old, too broken." Yet love demanded fight. She booked therapy sessions at a queer center, walks along the esplanade where they named fears aloud. Slowly Juliet resurfaced. A new painting, bold strokes of blue and gold. A laugh over foe at a cart pod. But Harlan's shadow loomed. A package arrived weeks later. Juliet's childhood bare, threadbare, with a note in Beatrice's script. "Come home before it's too late." Juliet burned it in the sink, flames dancing like demons, but the ash clung. Winter deepened, Portland's rains a relentless dirge. Kennedy's job steadied, but freelance dried, bills mounting like accusations. Juliet sold a piece, elation brief before doubt returned. "What if they're right?" she murmured one night, snow dusting the window. "What if this life breaks us?" Kennedy pulled her close, heartbeat to heartbeat. "Then we rebuild. Together." Yet in the quiet, Kennedy wondered if love's price was too steep, if Willow Creek's chains had forged links too strong to sever. The new year dawned brittle, Portland's frost etching fractals on windows like maps of inner turmoils. Kennedy and Juliet navigated the thaw with cautious steps, therapy sessions peeling back layers of inherited shame. The counselor, a soft-spoken woman named Lena with tattoos peeking from cuffs, validated what Willow Creek denied. Their love was valid, a lighthouse in fog, not a storm to weather. Juliet's art reignited, canvases crowding the apartment, abstract swirls of emerald and crimson evoking Oregon's wild heart. laced with threads of gold for the bonds unbroken. Publicly, they ventured out. A Valentine's reading at the bookstore, where Kennedy read Audre Lorde aloud, voice steady as Juliet's hand warmed hers under the table. Friends emerged from the margins, fellow artists at open mics, a barista with a pride flag pin who shared tips on grants. For the first time, Kennedy felt seen, not as the town fixture but a woman with stories etched in laugh lines and quiet strength. Yet exile's underbelly gnawed. Harlan's calls persisted, voicemails a litany of paternal pleas. Winter here's empty without you. Think of your mother. Beatrice sent photos, family holidays, empty chairs like voids. Juliet deleted them, but each one chipped at resolve, stirring dreams of reconciliation laced with nightmare. Spring brought bloom and betrayal. Juliet's work caught an agent's eye, leading to a solo show in June at a Hawthorne gallery, vintage storefronts and velvet ropes. A far cry from Willow Creek's county fair. Invitations went out, including one to the Hargroves, a olive branch wrapped in barbed wire. Let them see, Juliet said, sealing the envelope, what they've lost. Kennedy supported, though dread coiled low. The opening night hummed with energy. Wine glasses clinking, murmurs of admiration for Juliet's pieces. Cascades in Exile, a triptych of fractured landscapes mended with luminous seams. She circulated in a silk shirt borrowed from Kennedy, cheeks flushed with pride, until the door chimed and Harlan entered, Beatrice trailing like a shadow. The room hushed imperceptibly, air thickening. Juliet froze mid-sentence, champagne flute trembling. Kennedy, by the hors d'oeuvres, felt the shift like seismic tremor, crossing the space in measured strides. You came, Juliet said, voice pitched neutral, but her eyes begged stay. Harlan nodded, gaze sweeping the walls, paintings alive with what he'd tried to suppress. Saw your name in the paper. Drove up. His tone was gruff but softer, eyes lingering on a portrait of two figures intertwined against stormy skies. Them unmistakable. Beatrice clutched her purse, lips pursed. It's bold. But is this you really? Away from home. Juliet's laugh was sharp, a blade unsheathed. This is me. Always was. You just wouldn't look. The exchange drew glances, whispers rippling. Harlan shifted, discomfort etching furrows. We prayed. A lot. The pastor said. Maybe we were wrong. Strict. He glanced at Kennedy, acknowledgement grudging. Brought you something. From his coat, a keychain, the one he'd given, now with an extra fob. For when you're ready to visit. No strings. The gesture hung, a truce tentative as spring ice. Juliet took it, fingers brushing his, a spark of bridge building. They talked then, stilted at first, of weather and shows, then deeper. Beatrice admitting tears over the journal, Harlan confessing fears of losing her to a world he didn't understand. We thought we were protecting, he said. But love, it's bigger than rules. Kennedy watched from the sidelines, heart swelling and shattering. Progress fragile. But as the Hargroves departed, hugs exchanged, promises of coffee. Juliet turned to her, eyes shining. They saw us. Really saw. Elation carried them home. Love-making fervent. Bodies a celebration of survival. Summer deepened their roots. Juliet's show sold out. Funds easing bills. Kennedy started a blog on queer rural stories, words flowing like long-dammed rivers. They hiked Multnomah Falls, missed Kissing Skin, and picnicked in Forest Park, where oaks whispered approvals. But betrayal brews in unguarded hours. In August, Juliet's phone buzzed with a text from an old classmate. Lila from Willow Creek. Now in Eugene, heard you're famous. Dad's sick. Thought you'd want to know. Harlan's cancer, pancreatic, aggressive. The news landed like a gut punch, Juliet paling. I have to go. Kennedy nodded, masking the dread. We'll go. Together. The drive back was a descent into memory. I-5 a vein pulsing with past. Willow Creek unfolded unchanged. Sagging porches, the mill's skeletal frame against harvest moon. The Hargrove house loomed, lights dim, Beatrice's silhouette in the window. Inside, the air was sterile, chemo's tang mingling with potpourri. Harlan lay propped in the den, gaunt but eyes clear, grasping Juliet's hand. Knew you'd come, kid. Beatrice hovered, offering tea with hands steadier. A nod to Kennedy that held no warmth but less ice. Over days they settled into vigil. Juliet at bedside reading his old logging journals, Kennedy running errands, fetching meds from the pharmacy where stares still lingered. One evening as crickets chorused outside, Harlan called Kennedy to the porch. "I was wrong," he rasped, pipe unlit in hand. "About you. About her. Saw it in your eyes that night at the bridge, real love. Not the kind I gave B, all duty and drift." He coughed, waving off concern. "Take care of her when I'm gone. Promise." Tears pricked Kennedy's eyes. Forgiveness a bomb unexpected. "I will. Always." Harlan passed in September's hush, funeral a torrent of black suits and casseroles. Pastor Ellis's eulogy softened to include family, however it grows. Juliet stood dry-eyed, clutching Kennedy's hand under the tent, Beatrice leaning on her other side. A tableau of mending. Grief bound them tighter, Juliet channeling loss into art. A series on impermanence, sold to a Eugene collector. But sorrow unearthed fissures. Back in Portland, Juliet withdrew, nights staring at ceilings, murmuring, "What if I'd stayed? Could I have saved him?" Kennedy held space, but resentment simmered unspoken. "You chose us. Now own it." Arguments flared. Over forgotten chores, Juliet's late classes, small sparks igniting old wounds. "You're pulling away," Kennedy accused one rain-lashed night. Voices rising over takeout containers. "I'm grieving," Juliet shot back. "You can't fix this with hugs and hikes." The words wounded, echoing Beatrice's dismissals. Kennedy stormed out, walking Powell's aisles until dawn, books a refuge. Returning, she found Juliet asleep on the couch, sketchpad open to a half-finished portrait. Kennedy's face fierce and flawed. Reconciliation came slow. Therapy resuming. Apologies layered like varnish. They recommitted, vows whispered over coffee. Plans for a road trip east, chasing sunrises. But the betrayal lingered, a shadow. Juliet's secret call to Beatrice, seeking solace in the voice that once confined. Kennedy discovered it by accident. Phone left charging, voicemails glowing. "Miss you, Mom. It's hard here." No mention of her. The omission cut deepest, a reminder that blood's pull endures. Confrontation brewed over dinner. Thai curry cooling untouched. "Why didn't you tell me?" Kennedy asked, voice even. Juliet's fork paused. "It's not about us. It's her. Him gone. I need that peace. And I don't count?" The question hung raw. Tears welled. "You do. But this, it's mine to mourn." The fight dissolved into embraces, but trust frayed, a thread pulled loose. Kennedy wondered if love's endurance was myth, if Willow Creek's legacy was fracture, not freedom. Autumn leaves fell like warnings, Portland's vibrancy paling against inner storms. They persisted, hands linked in crowds, but the standstill cracked, time reclaiming its march. Winter's grip tightened that year. Portland's skies a perpetual slate, mirroring the pall that settled over the apartment. Kennedy and Juliet moved through routines like actors in a play grown stale. Morning coffee shared in silence, evenings with Netflix flickering against half-hearted cuddles. The betrayal of the secret calls festered, unspoken accusations layering like snowdrifts, until one February night, as sleet lashed the windows, it erupted. Juliet returned from a late critique, cheeks flushed from cold and critique, dropping her bag with a thud. "Professor loved the new series. Said it's raw human." Pride lit her eyes, but Kennedy, nursing a mug of chamomile at the table, felt the distance yawn. "That's great," she said, tone flat. "While you were bearing souls on canvas, were you bearing mine to your mom too?" Juliet stilled, coat half off. "What?" "The voicemails. It's hard here. No we. Just you unraveling us in whispers." Defiance flared. "I needed her. Not your permission." She shrugged off the coat, hanging it with deliberate care. "You can't own my grief." Kennedy rose, mug clattering. "Own? I gave up everything, home, name, the quiet I'd made peace with for us. And you treat it like a phase you can call home about." The room crackled, words weapons drawn. Juliet's voice rose, sharp as winter wind. "You think this is easy? Dad's gone because I left. Mom's alone, praying for a daughter who doesn't exist anymore. I call because I love them too. Love. Kennedy laughed, bitter. The kind that locks you in closets? That's not love. It's chains. Juliet advanced, eyes blazing. And yours? Safe, steady Kennedy, who waited years to feel anything. You're the one chained to regrets, to what Willow Creek made you. I'm young, I mess up, but at least I fight. The strike landed true, Kennedy recoiling as if slapped. Memories flooded. Elias's desertion, Sarah's fade, the years of ledgers and loneliness. Fight? This is destruction. You're breaking us because you can't break free. Silence fell, heavy as felled timber. Juliet's shoulders sagged, fight draining to sorrow. Maybe we both are. They slept apart that night, the bed a continent, dawn breaking gray and unforgiving. Days blurred into standoff. Polite passes in the kitchen, texts coordinating schedules. Kennedy buried in work, expanding the blog into a podcast. Voices from rural queers, stories of flight and fallout. Listeners trickled in, emails of thanks, a quiet vindication, but solitude amplified the ache. Juliet channeled into art, a final piece for a spring exhibit. Standstill, a diptych of frozen figures, one rooted, one fleeing, divided by a chasm of shattered glass. Critics praised its emotional depth, but Kennedy, attending alone in the crowd, saw only their reflection, the cost of collision. The exhibit's afterparty was a haze of small talk and Merlot, Juliet holding court with admirers while Kennedy nursed a water at the bar. Beatrice arrived unannounced, elegant in wool, her presence a ripple through the room. Saw the listing, she explained to Juliet, hugging stiffly. Proud of you. They talked genealogy, Hargrove roots in the town's founding, until Beatrice's gaze found Kennedy. You too, she said, extending a hand. For standing by. Kennedy shook it, surprise thawing ice. Always. Later, as guests thinned, Beatrice pulled Juliet aside, words lost in murmur. Kennedy watched, dread coiling, until Juliet approached, face ashen. Mom's leaving town. Selling the house. Wants me to. Help decide. The implication hung. Return, reclaim, rewrite. Juliet's eyes searched Kennedy's, plea unspoken. That night they talked until stars wheeled, truth spilling like confessions. I called her because I missed the girl I was, Juliet admitted. Not the rules. The belonging. Kennedy nodded, vulnerability her offering. And I fear losing you to it. Because without you, I'm back to empty roads. Dawn brought decision. They drove to Willow Creek together, not as fugitives but pilgrims, the Ford smiles a meditation. The town unfolded autumnal, leaves carpeting elm like faded metals. The Hargrove house stood gutted, echoes in empty rooms, Beatrice packing boxes with quiet efficiency. No lectures, she said over coffee, steam curling like olive branches. I was wrong. About a lot. Her eyes, red-rimmed, met Juliet's. But you're my daughter. Always room. Juliet hugged her, tears flowing free. I love you. But my life's there. With her. Beatrice nodded, glancing at Kennedy with something akin to grace. Take care of each other. That's the real inheritance. They left with a box of Harlan's journals, the keychain glinting on the dash. Back in Portland, spring erupted. Cherry blossoms veiling streets, a metaphor for renewal. Juliet's exhibit closed triumphantly, Standstill fetching a price that funded a down payment on a cottage in Selwood, walls for their stories. One June evening, as twilight painted the Willamette gold, they sat on their new porch, hands entwined, the river's murmur a lullaby. Time didn't stand still, Juliet said softly. It moved us. Kennedy squeezed her fingers, the touch now anchor, not ignition. To hear. Worth every shatter. In Willow Creek's shadow they'd forged light. Not without scars but luminous. Love, they learned, wasn't standstill but flow. Through betrayals and awakenings, defying norms that once confined. Kennedy glanced at Juliet, profile soft against the dusk, and felt the world's vastness, no longer cage but canvas. And in that expanse they drove on together, unyielding, free.